Okay, so let's talk about this. I guess I should start with, is anybody injured other than maybe your pride or anything? My pride is injured and I fell on my ass. So
My boots at least went out.
yeah,
At least.
okay.
My toe hurts.
Your toe hurts. Okay. Well, that's make an omelet, right? Something to break some eggs.
I'd rather not break a toe though.
Yeah, that's fair. I dislocated. I told you guys the story about my shoulder and having the stupid radiologist dig around in there.
Yeah.
Arguably, the most painful thing I've ever experienced in my life was a dislocated baby toe. Yeah. So it was in football in high school, and I got tackled from behind, and I was up like pushing off, and I was that toe off, and I got tackled from behind, and my baby pinky toe was like sitting up on top of my foot. And that wasn't pleasant, but you know what hurt worse was when they put it back. So when the orthopedic guy just went bloop and popped it right back into place, and like my toe had its own heartbeat. You could just feel it begin to swell up and things. It was really, really, really unpleasant in a lot of different ways. So I guess in that way, Lauren, I feel your pain, or even worse pain.
That sounds much better.
Okay. So here's my question. All right, here's my question. Show of hands. Okay, I think I know how this is going to shake out. So we did an experiment. We learned something in class today that potentially no one else knew until today. Okay? We learned that at least the people in class that are not from Oklahoma jumped on average about 6.7 floor tiles, whatever a floor tile is, probably about a foot. Okay? And our people from Oklahoma only jumped 5.7. So did we learn? Okay? Did we learn today that people that are not from Oklahoma can jump farther than people that are from Oklahoma? Okay, well, you seem like you maybe have a vested interest in this, Lauren, having been a person who is from Oklahoma. Did the Texans or the non-Oklahomans defeat the Oklahomans today? That's my question. Today, yes. Okay.
I would think technically just based off the pool of people in the classroom, I don't think we can address it.
You don't think we can address it? Why not?
Maybe not specifically to each age group either.
Okay.
I would just, it's just like pool size basically. Like,
Pool size. Like there just wasn't enough of you guys.
Yeah, maybe sample size.
Sample size.
It's also not random.
It's not random?
No.
What do you mean?
Well, like you said, it's not age.
Y'all all randomly decided to come to class today, or not, based upon what I said. Y'all were all sort of in some ways randomly signed up or got into this particular section of class. It's not like I said, okay, let me look around the room. I don't want you guys to do this and you guys to do that because I think that's what's going to make, right? We weren't picking teams or anything.
Right, but it's still not like a randomized study. We're all in college. We all completed our high school degrees.
Okay.
We have certain things in common, but in a true randomized study, you wouldn't necessarily see everyone have in common.
Oh, some things I'm going to tell you in a few minutes are going to blow your mind. Right? So.
Unless you're specifically looking for it, unless you're controlling for it.
Okay. Aren't we controlling those factors? Aren't y'all all relatively the same age and relatively of the same kind of rough education level and, you know, whatever you all chose this major? You think it would have been different if we'd gone to, I don't know, computer science or physics or something and had them jump? And we get the same result? You think y'all are more athletic as a group, more active as a group than other majors on campus? Is anyone even paying attention? Yes. Okay. So that's what I want us to figure out today. Okay. I'm going to walk you guys through a few things, and then we'll return to our question. Okay. Was this as good of an experiment as it could be? Okay. You all are all probably thinking maybe not. We probably could have done a few things a little bit better, but we'll see kind of how we did. Okay. So let's start with this. Let's start with this. What is coming? There we go. Okay. Sorry. So our goal by the end of today is that you guys can answer some questions about what makes a good experiment. Okay. What makes a good experiment? So therefore, by sort of deductive reasoning, you can figure out, well, this is what's good. Things that don't do this are less good, if not necessarily outright poor or bad. Okay. So let's start with this. Research and experiments have what we call independent and dependent variables. Okay. So the independent variable is the thing that is manipulated, and dependent variable is our outcome variable. So for our thing today, okay, what was our dependent variable? Very good, man. The length that we jumped. How far you jumped was the dependent variable. What was the independent variable? What was the thing that made our groups different? Where you're from, okay? Where you're from. So we could have done guys versus girls, right? We could have done that. That would have been a little kind of lopsided because our numbers weren't very good. When I do this in the summer classes, we usually jump like regular shoes versus sandals or flip-flops. That's always fun, okay? So these are the things that are going to go into. So pretty much every experiment has something that we're measuring, okay? How far you can jump, how tall you are, what your GPA is, okay? And stuff that makes the news. Like yesterday, they approved the Pfizer vaccine for 5 to 11-year-old kids. They have all of this data, and they were looking at sort of what is the incidence of chances of symptomatic infection in the group that got the vaccine and then versus a group that got a placebo. Okay, so we can, the thing that we're measuring is the dependent variable. And then the independent is the thing that we're changing. So in ours, we didn't really change anything. We just formed our groups based upon the independent variable. Okay, that's a very common way of doing things. Form groups based upon that. Okay. The other thing that we can do is, do you guys think this would have been better if I had told all of you guys to bring tennis shoes, boots, and flip-flops, and everybody's gonna jump, and we're gonna look at the differences in the shoes. Okay. If we had done that, then your shoe type would have been the independent variable. We would compare you to you rather than some other thing, which could potentially be a thing. Okay. So this is important, guys. This is going to be really, really important. I want you to be able to, if I give you a scenario, to be able to pick out what's the independent variable, what's the dependent variable. Okay. And then here's an idea that I'm sure most of you guys have some relations to. Okay. You've heard some things about all of this. And it's the idea of a correlation versus something that might give us an idea of causation. Okay? People are very fond of saying correlation is not causation. Did you guys know that we can find a correlation or a relationship between the number of ice cream cones sold in New York and the homicide rate? When you sell more ice cream cones, the homicide rate goes up. Is that because eating more ice cream makes people more murderous or something? No, of course not. Okay. Homicide tends to be greater in the summer, okay, for a host of reasons. Ice cream sales also tend to be greater in the summer, okay? Our daughter had real ice cream for the first time in her life last week, and I don't think she's ever going to be the same.
What is real ice cream?
Real ice cream is she had like, my wife got an ice cream cone from Brahms. She's had like fake, like low sugar, like it's fake, ice cream frozen yogurty, organic, I don't know, something that's not really great. Like, here's a chopped up pineapple smoothie thing. Anyway, she had real ice cream. She had Brahms, Rocky Road, and strawberry. Her life was forever altered. I have pictures. She was just like, what is this? This is the best thing. She ate like most of my wife's ice cream all by herself. She was like, no, Dada, no, this is mine now. It's mine. So it was great. Okay. Causation. So there's certain kinds of studies that we're going to do. We'll talk about those designs. There's certain kinds of studies that can tell us if there is a relationship. Because as one thing changes, does something else change? Okay. That gives us a relationship. Okay. There is a relationship between your high school GPA, your SAT or ACT score, and your college GPA. Okay. Whatever you did in high school is not going to cause your college GPA to be whatever it is. But in general, over many, many people, there tends to be people that did better in high school, unsurprisingly, tend to do better in college. Okay. There's a reason you take the SAT and the ACT, is that in a large group of people, it tends to be somewhat predictive. Okay. I saw, again, in my very aggressive things for today, there was a study that I saw yesterday that, what is the single best predictor of college GPA and classroom performance? Anybody want to guess? It's not your high school GPA, it's not your high school test scores or anything like that. Pardon? It is attendance, Lauren. Coming to class is the single best predictor across many, many studies of who does well in a particular class. Physically being here or being on Zoom, like actually coming. So, but that's a correlation. There are certain kinds of experiments that let us try to get at this idea of causation. Okay. So if we were to imagine this, okay, that as Nikki walks by, Devin trips her. Okay. Foot out, trip her. Okay. Causation. I put my foot out, she ran into it, lost her balance, and she fell over. Okay. That requires certain things. Okay. To have a causation experiment or an experiment that lets us get at this, we have to change an independent variable. Nikki walks by, no Devin foot. And she walks by again, foot out. Okay. We've manipulated whether there's something there to trip her. Okay. That's this idea with all of these things. So we'll talk about kind of how those experiments work. Okay. So some experiments let us do this. However, finding relationships can be very powerful and can be very good. Don't let Facebook or Instagram or whatever, and people like, oh, well, correlation isn't causation, kind of, the people that are wearing a mask get COVID less often. That's not a real causation. That's just a correlation. Don't worry about all of that. I'm not going to do those things. So we can still learn lots of information from that. Okay. Okay. So let me talk about a couple of other kind of study design aspects that I want you to know. The first thing is something called a prospective study. Okay. A prospective study. In a prospective study, we find people and then we follow them over time. Okay. Whatever that's going to be. Right. We're going to take Daniel and we're going to follow him for 5 years and ask him, what is he eating? How much exercise is he getting? And does he develop cardiovascular disease or high blood pressure or something like that? Okay. That's a prospective study. Okay. That's going to let us, as we look, or as your activity levels or your diet or your whatever changes, then we can follow you and see if those have any influence on our output. A different kind of study, which is in some ways more about relationships and less about potential kind of causative factors, is called a retrospective study. A retrospective study. In doing a retrospective study, we ask people about certain things. Okay, I can ask all of you, do you have, type 2 diabetes? And then I could take a medical history from all of you, or I could ask you about how active you were in high school or any number of things. And then try to, as we're looking backwards, okay, I find the people that have whatever it is that I'm interested in studying. Okay? And then we look backwards and we figure out, is there something common about all of you that we might be able to use to try to explain why you now have type 2 diabetes. Okay, so those are the two kinds of things. All right, retrospective studies are good for getting some initial information about things. Right, they often involve looking at medical records or dealing with these large groups of people. Okay, we could ask everybody on campus if they've ever had, say, alcohol poisoning, and then ask them about, I don't know, other aspects of their life or something, and see if there were some common things that might explain why those particular people had alcohol poisoning. Whereas prospectively, I'm going to enroll all of you guys, and we're going to follow you forward, and we're going to wait until some of you get alcohol poisoning, which I hope is no one ever. Okay? And then once that has happened, try to figure out what's going on. Okay, so does that make sense to you guys? Y'all understand that a little bit? Yes, no, maybe.
Everybody else knows this.
Okay. So, anybody had statistics?
Yeah.
Okay, good. A fair number. Madison, do you want to explain this for everybody?
I was like 3 years.
It's like 3 years ago. So we've slept some since then. So, okay. No worries. I would never ask y'all to do that. Okay. So this is the idea of a correlation. Okay. Correlations represent relationships. A correlation tends to have and tell us two things about a particular relationship. Okay. One, it tells us a direction. Okay, a direction. So that means if two things are changing in the same direction, right? That's a positive relationship. Or if two things are changing in opposite directions, that's what we call a negative relationship. Okay? So that's the first part, right? Whether this is going to be positive or negative. The next piece is a little more difficult to explain. If you've had statistics class, in y'all's class, did you talk about correlations? You talk about how they're calculated or anything else, how you get the R values and things? Talk about residuals and all of that? Okay, we're not going to do that anymore. But there's this idea of something called a magnitude, okay? And a magnitude just tells us very simply what is the strength of the relationship, okay? As one thing changes, to what extent does the other thing also change? And is it changing of a similar amount across many, many people? Okay, that's the magnitude. So the kind of general way that we get a correlation is we look at something called a Pearson correlation coefficient, which is an R value, a little baby R value. Okay, don't ask me why it's called R. I don't know. I've forgotten. It's been almost 20 years since I had a whole stats class just on doing all of this. I've tried to block it all out of my mind. Okay, but correlation values or R values generally range from -1.0 to +1.0. Okay, a correlation of 1.0, either positive or negative, is what we would call a perfect correlation. As one thing changes 1 unit, the other thing also changes 1 unit. This never in the history of the world has ever happened. Okay, there's nothing that's going to be like all of this. So what we do is we do some fancy mathematical calculations, and I'll show you guys some pictures that will help make this more sense, is we have these ranges, okay? A strong correlation, you get an R value between 0.7 and 1. A moderate correlation is 0.3 to 0.69, and a weak correlation is 0 to about 0.29, okay? The strength of the relationship matters. It matters. It can tell us the closer it is to 1, the larger the effect, the more powerful the effect, the more consistent the effect. It can tell us some things. So let me show you guys what some correlation things look like. When you're going to do a correlation, You guys did correlations on your last lab form, right? You did, and you plotted resting heart rate against your estimated VO2 max. You all remember doing that? You made a scatter plot, a thing that kind of looked like this, and then we drew a line, put a line of best fit through them. I hope you guys remember. I've looked at most of your labs. I haven't put the grades in yet, but you all actually did this. You did a nice job of those things. And there was, right, there was a correlation. There was a relationship to this thing. The lower your resting heart rate, the higher your predicted VO2. So what we have here are 3 examples of scatter plots showing a strong, a moderate, and a weak correlation. In the one here on the top right, this is a strong positive correlation. So these data, I borrowed these from a previous class that I was in. And what they're meant to represent is the number of practice sessions that a gymnast had, okay, from no practice up to 30 practice sessions, and their score that they got averaged across 3 judges from 0 to 10, okay, from 0 to 10. This is how gymnastics, at least on the collegiate level, is scored. The Olympians do it very differently now. So what you can see in our strong positive relationships, if you drew a line of best fit through here, right? Generally, the more I practice, the closer to a 10 I'm going to score, right? And then everybody's going to be not very far from kind of our line of best fit. It seems like you can see this relationship, okay? So that would have an R value of about 0.85. Here's a moderate positive relationship, and it's the same sort of idea. And there's a general trend, right? As I practice more, generally things are kind of going up. Okay, they're generally kind of going up, but it's not nearly, they're a little farther away from our line of best fit than what these are. It's not quite as kind of obvious. And then our weak correlation looks like what we often call this a shotgun blast. Okay, where maybe if you squint really, really hard, you can kind of imagine that it's going up a little bit, but in general, there's really no relationship between the number of practice sessions I get and kind of what my score is going to be. Okay? So this is how we do all of this. You do some mathematical calculations, you get your R value, and then you can look for relationships like this. Okay? Many of you may do things like this as part of your capstone project. So I just kind of want to introduce the idea or the concept of correlation. Okay? So there's a couple of other things that need to go into our understanding of experimental design to help make things better, okay, to make an experiment more powerful, to make the experiment better. Okay? And it's the idea of a cross-sectional versus a longitudinal study, and the idea of having independent groups versus something that we would call repeated measures. Okay? So a cross-sectional study is just what we did today. I grabbed you guys because you were in my class and we tested you right here, right now, today. You guys are a cross-section of junior level HES students. Okay? Y'all are probably reasonably representative of all of that. Okay, we're about 75 or 80% female in the department. And so y'all are pretty close to all of that. You're about the right age, et cetera, et cetera. That's cross-sectional. Grab some people, test them once, we're done. Okay? A longitudinal study is in many ways, it's kind of like a prospective study. Longitudinally, I would get all of you guys, we would test you, and then we would do something. We'd train you, or give you a supplement, like everybody gets caffeine today, or whatever it's going to be, and then we would have you do it again. Okay, we're going to let you come in and practice jumping for a month, and then we're going to test you guys again. Okay? That's longitudinal. It's the same people who are given some sort of manipulation or intervention, and we track them over time. Okay? We track them over time. The idea of independent groups versus repeated measures or repeated group testing. What we did today was an independent group. Okay? We split you guys based upon where you're from. And everybody was in one group or the other. Okay? You got tested once and you were in one group only. that's independent groups. The same people are not getting both interventions, or they're not kind of being put into both groups. In a repeated measures design, that would involve, right, bring in a pair of flip-flops, bring in some regular shoes so that poor Cameron doesn't have to jump in her boots, right? Lauren doesn't have to jump in her boots. One of those docks, what are those?
They're knockoff dogs. I got them from Kohl's.
Okay, knockoff docks. I have a pair of Doc Martens that I wore last year. When it gets cold, I'll wear them again. They're older than you guys. Okay? I got them when I was a freshman in college in the fall of 1996. I said it, it's okay. You're all right. Okay? So they're what, like 25 years old? It's crazy. What's happened to my life? Well, that can't possibly be.
No, they're 24.
4 years old. Either way, doesn't matter. They're old. Okay? So with repeated measures, you're going to jump in your boots, and you can put your flip-flops on, and you're going to jump in those. And that way you get compared to yourself, okay? Which is better, right? We notice, and we'll talk about kind of some differences in our groups on all of these things, that we're having to account for the fact that maybe people were different heights or different ages, or people were wearing different shoes, or some of y'all were more or less anxious about falling down in front of other people in class, or whatever the reasons might be. And so that way, doing repeated measures is in some ways more powerful. Okay. The other thing, and Lauren talked about this when she was saying that our thing wasn't random, that we need to talk about is this is our design. We also have to appreciate how we pick who's in the experiment, and then who gets into what group or who gets what treatment. And this is really, really, really important. Okay. So the idea of what we would call sampling is who are our participants, okay? You guys were my sample today. So my sample was my class, or whoever decided to show up to class today, okay? That's the sample. We could look at and increase our sample. We could test all of you guys, and then we could test Dr. Beller's class, and we could test the other two sections of 3813 beyond all of that, and make our numbers bigger if we want to. The really important thing though, about our sample is, in an ideal world, we want our sample to be quote unquote representative. Okay, and so you should say, Dr. Black, representative of what? Okay, representative of what? So, Nikki, what do you think you're representative of? Minority, okay, sure. Are you representative of women, do you think? Okay, how old are you? Do you think you're representative of 21-year-olds? Okay. So we need to understand when we design an experiment, okay, what is our target? What group of people are we interested in knowing more about? Okay. And so there needs to be some intention and some thought put into all of that. And then you go out and you make sure that you get a sample that looks like this. So I'd ask you guys, do you think y'all are representative of HES majors? What little you know of other people in our major? You think you're representative of other people in our major? Okay. Do you think you are representative of people that are your age at the University of Oklahoma? In all majors, sort of all 20 and 21-year-old or 22-year-old students at OU? Okay, you're shaking your head no. Why not? What makes you not like the rest of them?
Well, I think like being in this major, it encourages people to like work out more.
Okay.
Maybe in other majors, like I'm not saying they don't work out, but they might not be as active.
Okay.
So that could like.
Any of you guys change? I'm sorry, you were still going.
You're good. Yeah, that was it.
Anybody change how active you were once you joined the major and started taking classes and learned some things? A couple of you guys have. I also bet some of you were already more active. That may have been the thing that drew you to our major. Okay, so I would tend to agree that you guys are probably not as representative of all sort of junior level students at OU as you are of HES students. Do you all think you're representative of freshmen at OU? Maybe in how far you can jump, you might be, right? But do you think like academically, if we sent you back to take a freshman class again, do you think you'd be like, oh, I got this now? Right? I know how to study better. You're better prepared for all of these things, okay? So in the question then that we asked today, my folks from Oklahoma, do you think you are representative of all people from Oklahoma that are your age in respect or in regards to how you can broad jump? Think y'all were a reasonable kind of cross section of those people? What about my non-OU folks? I think y'all are representative of, I don't know, folks from Texas or Colorado or Arizona or Arkansas or wherever it is that you're from. Does that matter? Okay. So we want to understand this because what we find, this helps us with something we call generalizability. Generalizability means we did a study, we found something or we didn't find something. We have our results. We then want to take the results from our group of people and use that to try to draw an inference about all other people that look or sound or whatever are like the people that we study. Okay? Are like those people. It doesn't do us any good, and I'll make a ridiculous in some ways example, right? To ask you guys like what your VO2 max is or how fast you guys can run a mile if we're wanting to understand what predicts how fast Olympic milers can run, right? You guys are not all really representative of that. We need to test the actual people that we're wanting to apply our results to, okay? And that becomes really, really, really important, okay? This is one of the places where lots of studies don't do a great job. They test things in one population, and then they want you to be able to generalize those results to everybody, not just the group that looks like or sounds like or is represented by the group they tested. Okay? By the group that they tested. That's going to be a bit of an issue. If I give protein powder to men that are doing resistance training 6 days a week, and I'm interested in how much their muscles increase, okay, that tells us something about that particular group. It doesn't necessarily tell us what's going to happen in women or what's going to happen in older adults, okay, what's going to happen in adolescents or what's going to happen in people that work out 1 day or 2 days a week, okay? We've got to be very careful about understanding this, okay? So when you have a question you want to answer, this is where you start. This is where you start. To whom do we want to generalize? Now let's say we've gotten our sample, okay? We know who we want to have in our study, okay? Now we've got to, from a group of people, we have to select them and then assign them to a group. That didn't work today because we just took what's called a convenience sample, okay? But let's imagine we have the ability to grab from the population of all juniors at OU, from everybody, okay? I have everybody's ID number, okay? And from all of that, then we're going to pick people. The idea of selection and assignment, we want, if possible, we want both of these things to be what we call random, okay? It almost never, ever is. Almost never, okay? I can, and we will. How many of you guys have gotten a senior capstone survey in the last couple of weeks? Okay, good. How many of you filled out said senior capstone survey? Shame on all of you that didn't, because that's going to be you one day. You're going to be sending out the survey. You're going to be hoping people take it. Have good karma. Take their surveys if you can, if you qualify for it. Okay, if you qualify. So Why were you guys picked? Do you guys know how y'all ended up getting the survey? It was either that it was sent out through OU mass mail or it was sent out to the departmental listserv. Okay, so I can select people based upon that. You fit my criteria. Do all members have an equal chance of being chosen to be in the study? If I'm interested in all juniors on campus, I can mass mail a survey to all juniors on campus, okay, to everybody. Therefore, everyone has an equal chance, theoretically, of filling out the survey and thus being included in our sample. Okay? Assignment, so selection is who are we going to pick? Okay? Assignment means, let's say we're going to do an intervention. Okay, my lab is doing a study, and we want to look at the effects of if I give you caffeine, does it make you jump farther? Okay, you come in, you get two nice cups of Starbucks coffee, right, or whatever your coffee of choice is. We juice you up with caffeine, we have you jump. You come in on another day, and we give you the same coffee, but it's decaf, and you got to jump again. Okay, so if we do repeated measures, your assignment doesn't matter because you're going to get both things. You're going to get a coffee day and a non-coffee day. But what we did today, in some ways, assignment-wise, it's you just get into one group or you're in the other group. So one group's going to come in and get coffee. The other group's going to come in and not get coffee. So we want that to be random. I don't want to have everybody walk in and I'm thinking, okay, I think Madison's going to not jump very far. We're going to put her in the non-coffee group. And I think Emma is going to jump far, so we're going to put her in the coffee group. And then I'm going to, because I want, and I have some vested interest in the caffeine showing that you can jump farther. So I'm going to pick who I think is going to do what, okay? What it would need to be is random. That every odd numbered person that walks in gets into one group. Or if the last digit of your ID number is even, you're in the coffee group. If it's odd, you're in the non-coffee group. Okay. That way, as a researcher, I'm not making that choice. It is in some ways more random. Okay. Does that make sense? You guys understand that? What this does, the purpose of who are we sampling, who gets picked, and what group do they end up in, is it eliminates researcher bias. Okay. It eliminates bias. Not completely, but a lot, okay? When we send out surveys, there are some of you that will take every survey from a capstone group that goes out. There are some of you that will take none of them. Our results on those capstone surveys are biased because very often the people that will fill out the survey are going to all kind of fit into kind of certain groups of people, right? There are some characteristics of people, their personality characteristics, or if they're working or whatever, that they don't have time, something that's going to determine a little bit of who takes something and who doesn't. Okay. If I told you all, have I told you all this, that we paid people $1,000 to crutch around when I was a PhD student? Yeah. Right? Do you think that that might alter and not get us random selection and assignment if I'm like, hey, we're going to pay people $1,000 if you'll come do this study for us. Okay. Some of you are like, I could use $1,000. I'd like $1,000. That would be great. Not that all of you probably wouldn't, but some of you are like, you know what? I don't know. Some people would be more desperate for that money than not. Okay. I drive by a CSL Plasma on 23rd Street in Oklahoma City every morning. The place is always packed. I'm not going to lie. If you look at the cars in the parking lot at the CSL Plasma, you know what you're not seeing? You're not seeing the cars that look like the people that go to the Cassidy School. If anybody knows anything about Oklahoma City, if you drive by there, you're not seeing people in Range Rovers and Suburbans and those kinds of things that are going to be there. People are motivated to come and donate their blood and their plasma, which we need, but they're motivated by the money. So you're getting certain people. That's not a random kind of thing. Okay? So I should tell you guys, if we have a blood drive on campus, please give blood, please give plasma. We need it desperately. If anybody in here is O negative, you're the universal donor, please give as often as you possibly can. Okay? So these are going to be these kinds of things that we need. two other things down here that I want to talk about. Do we have a control group today? Lauren says no. Ramsey, what do you think? We have a control group?
No.
Why not?
Because the control group is the one that's like not affected by it.
Okay.
So we didn't have anyone not jump.
Perfect. We didn't have anybody that didn't jump. Okay, good. Right? So a control group is a group that doesn't get your manipulation, that doesn't do anything. Okay? If we want to know the effects of any kind of exercise training program in a study, we have to have a control group that does not train. Okay? Because we need to know if it's possible that over some period of time, your strength or your muscle size or your weight or your body composition or whatever we're interested in, it may change in people that aren't doing anything. And it may change for reasons that have nothing to do with our specific training protocol. And so we have to have control groups so we can get some estimate of what is the normal fluctuation in these variables over time. Okay? And compare that to is whatever we saw with our training or our supplement or our drug, bigger than that or smaller, whatever we're doing, so that we can say for sure it wasn't just random happenstance. Okay? It wasn't just random happenstance. In a lot of instances, if I'm going to give you a drug, a supplement, right, some kind of footwear or something, we also want to try to use what's called a placebo. A placebo is something that looks like our experimental treatment, but it lacks the active ingredient. Okay? It lacks the active ingredient. You guys come in, I give you coffee that has caffeine, or I give you coffee that doesn't have caffeine. It's the same coffee. Okay? It theoretically tastes the same, and then you don't know. Okay? There is a thing, and I forgot, maybe Dr. Beller remembers, but people change their behavior. There is bias simply from being in a study. Okay? You're going to come and you may answer a question differently because you think that's what we want to hear or we want to know. Okay? Or you may try harder on something because you're like, oh, I think today was the day that I got caffeine. My coffee had caffeine. I'm going to try harder. You may not intend to, but sometimes you do. And so using the placebo is a way to try to trick that out of you. We also sometimes will use psychological manipulation, where we would tell Cameron that we were giving her caffeine and then not give her caffeine. We might tell Taylor that she's right, that she is not getting caffeine and then give it to her and then see what happens. Okay. In an effort to see and try to understand what are the effects of being in the study and of this kind of treatment device. As we've looked at things, and I saw this the other day, okay, you guys are aware of what ivermectin is? This is the horse dewormer that lots of people have been taking and has been prescribed by some doctors. It's sometimes given to people, but you could buy it at like Tractor Supply Company. It's a horse dewormer. People have been taking it because it's supposedly like it's parasites and things that would be preventative for COVID. There was one big study where they tested it. They found that it was effective at keeping people or treating people for COVID. The problem was there was no control group and there was no placebo group. It's just, here are some people that took this and they didn't get it as often as, they didn't have as bad symptoms as often as what other studies have reported their people to. Okay? And so because of that, without a control group, without a placebo for the ivermectin, it's really difficult for us to be able to gauge the true effectiveness of, was this thing working? Okay? And so I think this is really important. When we give the vaccines, we need a control group, right? Nobody knows if we have a placebo where you get the shots and things, but there's no active ingredients. I've often wondered if they ought to give people the flu shots because it's kind of hard. Any of you that got vaccinated, like the second vaccine knocked me on my ass for about 2 days. So I don't really understand how, I mean, in some ways it doesn't really matter because you may know that you probably got a placebo because you had no, but like my parents had nothing. They never got sick, they never got anything. Anybody get a little, flu shot, you feel a little down? I wonder if they ought to use like flu shots as the kind of placebo or as the control for the other ones, in especially younger folks. So any of you guys that had COVID, maybe you may have gotten a big reaction after the first shot because you already had primed your immune system. So these things are really, really important for us to be able to draw the most accurate conclusions about, is something working, is something not working, is our training effective, is our diet effective, is our ability to treat cardiovascular disease effective, et cetera, et cetera. All of these things are about. Okay. It is impossible to do the world's most perfect study. We can't generally have all of these things going on, but we can try. Okay. Okay. I'm going to end by doing this. Okay. I went to a small liberal arts college where my the entire school had about as many people in it as we have HES majors. Okay. If you count pre-majors that are freshmen and sophomores, we have about 1,000. Okay. There were about 1,000 students where I went to school in arts. About 1,000. Okay. It was wild. There were twice as many people in my high school. But because of all of that, we didn't take this class that all freshmen took. It was 2 semesters. It was called Western Intellectual Traditions. It was the real liberal arts, touchy-feely, start with the Greeks and progress all the way up, like through, basically kind of modern thought on like, why do we think the things that we do and where did democracy come from, and learn about different religions and philosophy and all of this other kind of crazy stuff. One of the things that we had to read was a fellow named John Stuart Mill. Okay, and so this is not from what we had to read of Mill, but this is I think it's really interesting. So these were some things that were developed from his book called A System of Logic, Ratiocination, and Induction that was published in 1843. These have been adapted. I got these out of a health promotion book, actually. These have been adapted for looking at the risk of chronic diseases, okay? Or if something is causing a chronic disease, or if an intervention is going to prevent a chronic disease. So Mill had these things, he called them canons. There were 5 of them, okay? And the idea behind Mill's canons is that the more of these canons that we meet or we see with a particular research study, the more we can be convinced that something is causing something else to happen. Okay, so these are what we would call criteria for causation. Okay, if we can meet all 5 of these, then there's a reasonable chance, or a very reasonable chance, that whatever we're studying, one thing, our independent variable manipulation caused our change in our dependent variable. Okay, so let me walk you guys through these. Okay. The first is something called temporal sequence. This at its most basic means that if you were exposed to something and then you got sick, okay? Or, right, Lana turns around and smacks Emma in the head and then Emma punches her, right? So one thing precedes the other. And so the temporal sequence means that your exposure to a risk factor must precede the development of your disease. Okay. On Monday of next week, we'll talk about risk factors for cardiovascular disease. Okay. You need to be sedentary for some period of time before you develop cardiovascular disease in order for us to have any thought that being sedentary might cause that cardiovascular disease. Okay. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay, so that's temporal sequence. If one thing, I got sick and then I got exposed afterwards, then obviously your exposure wasn't what made you sick. Okay, we'll come back to strength of association in a minute. Consistency. Okay, whatever happens, or your observed association is always observed if the risk factor is present, regardless of a host of other kinds of things. Okay. So one thing precedes the other, and very, very often, if not every time, but very, very often, when that one thing precedes, you're always going to get sick. Okay? You're always going to get sick. So consistency, it happens over and over and over. Right? many people with many different characteristics. Okay. The third one is something called a dose response, which I know we've talked about. This is the idea that if a little is good, a lot more is going to be better. So the idea of a dose response is that if you're sort of mildly exposed to the risk factor, that you get a mild chance of developing the disease. If you have a lot of exposure to the risk factor, then you've got an even bigger chance of getting a particular disease. Think of a dose response. I think I've made this analogy before. Think of a dose response for any of you that have ever had alcohol before. I don't want to know. I'm not encouraging this, but I'm also not, aware of what happens in college. Okay? You have one glass of wine in an hour. You may have zero sort of feelings of intoxication or impairments of motor skills. Okay? You have 2 glasses and you're a little bit tipsy. You have 4 glasses in an hour and you can't talk. Okay? That's a dose response. A little bit of exposure may or may not cause a little bit of whatever it is that's going on. But a much larger exposure will cause a much larger. Okay? So that's the idea behind a dose response. Okay? One thing precedes the other. When it precedes, it's very consistently going to lead to the other thing. A little bit of exposure, you get a little bit of your disease. A big exposure, you get a much larger chance of disease. Okay? Then we need to talk about what's called strength of association. This means that there is a large and clinically meaningful difference in disease risk between those exposed and those not exposed. Okay? This is the idea of something that we also sometimes call an effect size. Okay? This is that our R value of our correlation is 0.7 and not 0.2 or something like all of that. Okay? This strength of association, okay, this is in many ways to take our current situation, the strength of association. This is the crux of, do we wear masks or not? This is the crux of people that are y'all's age. Should you get a vaccine or not? Or are they just approved them in people that are little kids that are 5 to 11? Should we give it to them or not? It's the, what is the strength of association? Okay. How strong or how powerful of a mitigating factor is wearing a mask or not? And is the amount of protection that we get from it sort of clinically meaningful? And then that idea of clinical meaning is going to vary from person to person. Right? What is your tolerance for risk? What is, how much of a benefit is there to a vaccine in a group of people that are generally at low risk anyway, or low risk of sort of bad outcomes anyway? Right? So these are the kinds of things. In an ideal world, right, if we're looking at a drug or a risk factor for a chronic disease, the strength of association needs to be pretty sizable, okay? So that we can say there's going to be a clear benefit or some clear risk of exposure to all of this, okay, that we want to then try to come in and come back. And then the last one is sometimes the most difficult one to get, but this is the one that to me is the idea where people that want to sell you something take advantage of. It's the idea of something called biological plausibility. Okay? Biological plausibility means that there may be some kind of reasonable explanation on things that we know that could cause this thing to happen. Okay? It is biologically plausible that this happens. Okay? There may be some things like, it's biologically plausible that if I feed you extra protein, that might help make your muscles bigger because your muscles are made of protein. Okay? I give you more protein and your muscle protein synthesis goes up. Therefore, it's biologically plausible that it may be doing this. Okay? So you can look at some of this and we can have a temporal sequence, we can have consistency, we can have a dose response, we can have biological plausibility. But like with protein powder, where that sometimes fails is it may not be clinical, it may not be a big enough of an effect that it actually matters. It meets all the other ones, right? And it looks like it should work. I've gotten sucked into watching these TikTok videos that people put on Facebook now, the reels or whatever. I understand how y'all just like spend an hour, like I'm on TikTok just scrolling and laughing, and they're all just doing the same dumb dance to the Brooks and Dunn song and everything else. Killing it. But athletic greens, you guys know what athletic greens are? Right? You know what's in there? I don't know what's in them. I mean, it's apparently they're like, oh, look, it's the stuff from plants and it's good and it's got vitamins and minerals in it. That sounds like it's biologically plausible that it can help you. I don't know if it does, right? We have no, I don't know if there's actually data on all that, but it looks like it should. So people will buy it, right? It looks like it should. So if we want to say that one thing causes another, we want to try to fulfill as many of these things as we possibly can. Okay. The other piece that I want to bring to y'all's attention, okay, and it's going to come into this idea of consistency. The other part of science that we've not done a great job of conveying to people. This is where science, like my wife, gets mad at me. My wife is a history major. She has a master's degree in sports administration. And she gets mad at me and she says, you're a scientist. You're just going to change your mind tomorrow. Right? Whatever you think works today, you're going to change your mind and it's going to be something different tomorrow. And my answer is yes. That's the point. When we have new data that meet these criteria, we have to be willing, okay? We have to be willing to be convinced by data and have an open mind. We want to be skeptical, but if we see things that look like this, even if we think that's fucking crazy, we have to let the data guide what we're doing. And if you can meet these things, then we'll be like, okay, maybe the sky isn't actually blue. Maybe it's purple. Okay? Maybe it's red. Or something like all of that. Maybe we're all actually in the matrix. I don't know. Okay? So we have to be open-minded. This has caused us a huge amount of problems with COVID because this thing was brand new. We didn't know anything. And so they made their best guess based upon these things to start with. Nope, you don't got to wear a mask. We don't think it's aerosol. Probably not going to be a big deal, right? It's kind of probably like the flu. You don't need to wear a mask. Whoops, we were wrong. Please wear a mask, right? And you're like, well, what the fuck? Who do I believe? First you said no, now you say yes. Do you know what you're talking about? And the answer is most of the time, yes. It's just that there were new data. We made a guess, right? And now we changed our mind because we have new evidence available to us. Oh, we think it's this. We thought at first, everybody like me, we're like Clorox wiping down all of our food. Like you're going anywhere and like wiping off doorknobs. And we thought, oh, I got to touch things. And that's how I'm going to get it. Turns out that's not really right. Right? Nobody Clorox wipes all of their things all the time anymore. As we learn more, okay, we need to be open to changing our mind. When we don't have a lot of data, we have to make some guesses based upon what is available. And this leads me into this idea of consistency. Ideally, we have not one study, but 20 that all do the exact same thing. They all test the exact same thing, okay, in roughly the same manner. And then we look at, are the findings consistent across all of these different studies? And that should be a thing that guides us, okay? I did one study on you guys here in my classroom. Our non-Oklahomans jumped farther than our Oklahomans did, okay? Now we need to go off and do another one in a different class, in a freshman class, okay, in a graduate class. Let's do more and see if this holds up. And then if it does, then maybe we're onto something, okay? So that's kind of my pitch and my plea for you guys. But this is where, and again, I'll bring it back to COVID, but it's going to be the same. This is going to happen all the time with things, guys. With new drugs, with new supplements, is one study. We're having to make decisions on COVID on like one study or two studies, okay? That's not normally how science has to work. We've had to do that because this is happening right now and it's a big deal. It's affecting a lot of people. We're going to have to make some decisions and they're going to be wrong sometimes, okay? To be a good scientist, you have to be open-minded. You have to be willing to admit that you were wrong. You have to be willing to admit that we have new data and I'm going to change my mind. Okay. We'll have a lot vested. We still use ice, right? Athletic trainers, they still use ice all the time. Madison, you going to get the ice, putting the ice on anything this week? Anybody on the track team put ice on something this week? Yeah? Okay. Riley, you had to put ice on any of your injuries? Folks on the volleyball team to do that? Yeah. No scientific or new scientific evidence has suggested that icing doesn't do anything for what people typically use it for. And yet we're still doing it. Okay? It's hard to change our beliefs. Look at these things. Ice has biological plausibility. It doesn't have a lot of the other ones anymore, but it has this, so it seems like it ought to work. Okay. All right, so the very, very end, I'm like, here's what makes a good study. It's kind of just taking all of these things and put them all together. Can we do all of these things? No, no, no. Okay. All right. What's due today? Aerobic training program. Several of you sent me your programs to look at. That's great. If any of you would still like me to look at yours, also awesome. Okay. I'll try to get the labs graded and get the grades posted today or tomorrow. I need to grab all the videos for the lectures, also everything. Okay. All right. Very good. I will see you guys on Monday. Have a good weekend. Please leave me your data. Thank you.